mean, seriously.
Well, it's just, you know, in the culture, in like Chan culture, and I think in internet culture, that kind of is a reflection of that.
Mm-hmm.
This was kind of an ironic gatekeeper. You know, Hitler did nothing wrong, whatever, just stuff like that. Because your reaction would either be, I can't even be in the same room with these people. I am tainted by, unclean leper. I mean, there was almost like a moral leprosy kind of deal in the mainstream that you at least had to pretend to believe in. Or people just said, oh yeah, right, sure, haha. It was an ironic kind of a gatekeeper. Are you going to have that hysterical reaction, or are you just going to throw a little salute back and then get on with life kind of deal? But I think some people mistook the irony for like a serious political discussion. And I mean, if you want to talk about, the whole thing about the JQ or the IQ, the Irish question, that was a big question at one time. All these different ethnic questions, these were serious topics of discussion in like the 19th, early 20th century. I've read some Jewish writers on the Jewish question. It's very interesting to write what Jews and Europeans were saying about this stuff in the 19th and early 20th century. And a big part of it had to do with the clash of cultures. I remember one Jewish gentleman was very interesting. He talked about like different philosophical underpinnings of Jewish culture that made it different and separate from European cultures. This wasn't seen as bad or evil, but possibly a strength that you could add to your society. But certainly it was something that you could talk about sanely and not in a corrosive way, or trying to use it as an excuse to turn people into second-class citizens or something like that. Yeah. But the stuff that's going on now, I think a lot of it springs from this early irony. Something that happened on Lit, which I used to go on quite a bit on 4chan, and Harold Bloom passed on. I don't know if you guys know who Harold Bloom is. He was probably he's a writer, English writer. Not an Englishman, but he was an English man. That was his forte, was the English language.
Yeah, I think the name does ring a bell.
Yeah, he was big on Shakespeare. He wrote The Invention of the Human, Shakespeare, The Invention of the Human. He wrote on the Western Canon, was another book he wrote. He was considered kind of right-wing simply because he defended the canon, which was 90%, white European dead men. But Harold Bloom was a celebrity on Lit. People loved him. They'd argue about him. They'd make fun of him. And then when he died, there was a pinned post for him, which Lit only does for literary giants. And everyone was in mourning, and there were a couple of guys on there. It's like, but he was a Jew. He was Jewish. Like, you don't get it, do you? You really don't. What are you doing here? You really don't understand. This man was one of the great giants of literature, not as a writer himself, but as a critic and as a scholar. And everybody, all the people on there were just, I think there were two people that were bringing up his race. And it's like, we might have joked about this and this came up in this and that, but just the underlying respect for a great man who passed, at least, a great man on 4chan. I mean, people argue about his merits and stuff, but I always regarded him as a wonderful, wonderful influence on my understanding of Shakespeare. I don't agree with everything he wrote. He was amazingly off on his analysis of Henry IV, I think, in some ways, with the character of Falstaff. But, well, I'm not going to get into that. I could talk for about half an hour, 45 minutes about Harold Bloom's interpretation of the Falstaffian character and Prince Hal. He hated Prince Hal. He really thought he was the wicked villain of that piece. For him, Sir John Falstaff was the great hero. He really thought that Hal's betrayal of Falstaff at Henry IV and in Henry V was like, he was very upset about that. This was a man who could get really upset about Shakespeare characters. There aren't too many people like that. They cut him to the quick that like Prince Hal would act that way. It's a play. It was written hundreds of years ago.
That's why I like doing the Baconian stuff, is because like you start seeing like there were a lot of people who were obsessed in that stuff. Like there's it's cool to go through and and look at the Bacon conspiracy and all that stuff. You know what I mean? And I do personally believe that Shakespeare was just a pen name. Don't get me wrong, but I'm not like going to take it to the extremes that these guys did. Like they were hardcore. You know what I mean? They didn't play around when they debated over Shakespeare. They were out for blood. It might have been. Oh, go ahead.
You've got your Baconians, you've got the Stratfordians, the people that believe that the Stratford moneylender and small-time actor was the author. You've got the Marlovians, the people that think that Marlowe was the author. There are a lot of theories. I personally think Bacon makes a lot of sense. Obviously, and I always caveat, we don't know. I make no pretense of saying, yes, Bacon wrote this, or, Essex wrote that, or whatever. Some people think Queen Elizabeth wrote the plays. I've heard that theory. We know so little. So many records were lost, especially in the Great Fire, where apparently they were storing huge amounts of government records in a big canvas tent. A painted canvas tent that had been up for like 10 years or something. They just kept putting documents there. So little information survives. But Bacon makes a lot of sense simply because of the depth of his learning, from other comments made by people at the time, by certain dates and so forth. But I don't think we'll really ever know for sure who the author of the plays was, or indeed, I tend toward the idea that it was a committee, and we've talked about this before, that it was a group of good pens. I mean, even mainstream Stratfordian scholars will say, well, this play, for example, this looks like it was written by Middleton, and this part would look like it was written by Johnson, and Shakespeare wrote this, So it's not that far a leap to say that many, if not most of the other plays were collaborative. And we do know that Bacon and Johnson worked very closely together, and Bacon himself talked about having a stable of good pens that were working for him all the time. And Johnson supervised. And of course, that's how I brought up before Dumas Père, Alexandre Dumas, when he wrote the Three Musketeers and all of the sequels. I mean, I read those, they're amazing, but they're like hundreds of chapters. They're huge books. He had like 7 writers. He did the outline, gave them each a chapter outline, then he'd take it, edit it, rewrite it, and boom, he could crank out these things. It's not a new idea, and certainly it does not reduce his responsibility. I mean, as somebody said, Dumas, without those other writers, could have produced the work. Those other writers without Dumas did not produce the work. So obviously, I don't think it makes Dumas any less the actual author of the books. So, but yeah, it's an interesting question, and you can, like you say, Raj, you can go a little overboard, I think, because. Yeah. It's one thing to say, all right, Bacon might have written this, and we've got this reference in another letter, and we've got this similarity of handwriting, Then they start getting into the cryptographic ideas. Yeah. Like if you take the first 3 letters of each of this, and this letter is printed slightly larger, and look at this front piece, and if we trace them this way in this weird angle related to Freemasonry, look, it spells out Francis Bacon, which is very close to Francis Bacon.
Yeah. Like, remember when we covered the Shakespeare cipher, where that guy had the cipher.
That's the drum with all the machine that he built. You get fascinated with this stuff.
He literally bankrupted himself trying to find the hidden freaking what was it, the manuscripts, Shakespearean manuscripts that disappeared, and they were.
Imagine if he had the internet. Just a Commodore 64, just like I watched that video, Mark, one of the videos you posted. I'm getting through them, but the one about like the supercomputer, how Cray was developing this stuff. Yeah. It's like, just give this guy one of those, and he really could have taken out with Shakespeare.
Well, he ended up trying to dig freaking under the Thames. He swore up and down like the manuscripts were hidden under the Thames River. I mean.
Oh, yeah. There's people that think they were on Oak Island, the so-called money pit. Yeah, supposedly that's where the Freemasons hid the manuscripts, or the Rosicrucians or something.
Mm-hmm. Well, you heard about the one about the Queen, and they suspected her of actually being Bacon's mother, even.
Oh yeah.
Like,
Well, yeah, that's obviously Robert Devereux was the father. Her sweet Robin, and oh yeah, certainly. There's all kinds of evidence for that, and I mean, it's quite possible. If you read the Spanish diplomatic records of the time, foreign ambassadors in London talked about the Queen being secretly married, about this Queen being pregnant or having children. This is usually dismissed as like, well, this is just Catholic propaganda, or they're just, whatever bad gossip they could find, they would repeat, kind of deal. It would not be impossible that Bacon was related to Elizabeth or wasn't. There are some odd things about the way his birth was recorded as well. He was the only child of his house to be called in, the birth. They'd have like Anthony Bacon was his brother and this and that. And when he was born, it was Mr. Francis Bacon.
Oh,
it's kind of odd.
Yeah. Well, his death was even weird. And then like I started doing research into Shakespeare, and his death was really weird as well.
Same day as Cervantes. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah. Well, it's like the whole thing with his family too. Like they had to come up with ways of justifying why his daughter didn't get the inheritance and why, stuff like that. And it was like they tried to say that she had married a guy who was like homosexual, and he was arrested for bigotry. And
wow,
and
okay,
and Shakespeare disowned her and her husband because of that.
They have records of any of that?
Yeah, it's actually documented about him and his daughter. And then it said that the only thing he gave his wife was for her inheritance was the wedding bed.
Oh, the second best bed. Yeah, that was very famous. He didn't think much of his wife, apparently.
Yeah.
I don't know. I haven't looked into any of this in a long time, but I know that the records that we have of the Stratford man, basically shows a, middle class money lending wool merchant. His father was basically a speculator in wool, which was, of course, highly illegal. But they did it anyway. And there was one point where the wool market collapsed. I think it had something to do with the 80 Years' War, or there was some kind of an embargo or something happened. And his dad lost a lot of money, I know. But I'm getting my other electronics are making beeping noises at me. Okay. There's so many electronics now.
Yeah.
I hadn't heard that about his son-in-law, but I do know that one of the things I found very striking about him was that his parents were illiterate and his children were illiterate.
Yeah.
Now, when we say illiterate, we have to be careful. People forget that reading and writing were taught as two different skills.
Mm-hmm.
So, they go on about Charlemagne not being able to being illiterate, not being able to read and write. He could read to a point. I mean, he's a king. He's got to know how to figure out some Latin, but he doesn't have the skill of penmanship.
Right.
That was a completely different thing. But that being said, I know of no English writer or poet whose not only parents were illiterate, but who allowed all of his children to never learn how to write, which seems very odd. Hello, Tan.
Hey, Tan.
Hello, gentlemen.
We are here and ready, man.
How's everybody doing?
We are doing. So,
just finishing off some work.
You're finishing off some work. You got.
Yeah.
That reminded me. How are you doing today, Otto? Because I know you were doing pretty bad with your health and stuff. Are you doing?
Oh, I've had a lot. I feel a lot better physically. I was very sick for a while, and really, really bad. I think it was a sinus infection. I was in a lot of pain, a lot of nausea, dizziness, and stuff. I think I was running a bit of a fever, but I'm feeling much better today.
Okay.
My poor mom is sick too, though, which is a problem. So I was finally well enough to go see her in the nursing home yesterday. She's been diagnosed with COVID, and she's not well.
Oh.